And now we're going to look at this 1960s phenomena about the liberalization in the West. And really, as Dr. McKay talked about the development of this consumerism and affluency, I do want to point out before we get to the slide, we begin to see this generational gap. And the generation gap is between the silent generation and the older boomers, the baby boomers. Remember the baby boomers that were, they're born in 1945, 46 into the 1950s, and there's going to be this generation gap where the silent generation, they were excited to be out of the depression, excited to be out of World War II, and they're really going to engage in this consumerism in which we see the microwaves and these other elements by the time we get to the 1960s that really transformed the daily life of the average American. Well, as this was becoming a very materialistic culture, we begin to see this emptiness, and that emptiness really drove the baby boomers. The baby boomers are going to ultimately, early on, reject the materialism of the silent generation. They begin to realize that all of these quote unquote cool and hip time saving devices for the housekeeping actually embedded women even further into it. Additionally, the intellectuals of the age really challenged the idea that fulfillment can be found in material possessions. The social mores in all aspects, from the views on drugs, sex, property, all of these elements are absolutely going to be drastically challenged. And with the increased access to universities, there's going to be this intellectual rejection of the intellectual and cultural norms that were seen as acceptable and true, especially based on reason and rational understandings. So think about that. The increased universities is all going to be about the GI Bill in America, but all of these World War II veterans are now going to be entering colleges, and all of a sudden, for the first time, we see universities become a point for social mobility. People of the lower classes have access to university because of the GI Bills and other affluency, and they're able then to emerge. And this is really going to challenge. We're going to begin to see how the lower classes are, in many ways, mistreated at the universities, not very welcomed because they're going to be seen like you're less than. And that's going to really create this binary that's going to create that conflict and tension. And last, I just want to make sure you remember, as an as an American student, as you begin to as you look at the concept of baby boomers, and you believe they're preventing progress, you must remember that these boomers were also the hippies that challenged every aspect of the culture. So the generation gap between the boomers and the silent generation is very similar to the challenge that you have with the boomers today. And there's a couple other reasons for that that you can definitely look at. In 1960s, you have this new versions of religion. Protestantism continued its anti-intellectual, anti-science perspective, really led to further secularization, especially in countries like England. People began to kind of reject this element and really begin to see that Protestantism still has not completely rebounded from its decline, where Catholicism saw a revival with the liberalization. You have Pope John, I believe it's the 18th, is in power. He really wants to liberalize the church, and he calls in what Dr. McKay called the Second Vatican Council. I think many ways we just usually call it Vatican II. Either way, and the Second Vatican Council really ushered in this new era of liberal ideology. At the Vatican Council, they decided to utilize the vernacular, the vernacular in the liturgy. Basically now they're going to be able to use everyday language within the confines of the services, so people now can fully engage. And the index of prohibited books was removed. They finally got rid of that archaic document that prevented good Catholics from reading certain works. And we can even celebrate that The Catholic Church actually removed Galileo from the purgatory, woo, and recognized the idea that the anti-scientific approach was outdated as well. So Catholicism actually begins to see an increase in population as the Catholic countries. There's a sense of this new liberalization. And again, that's just an important element. And that's going to lead us right to the countercultural movement, intellectualism. So when we talk about the countercultural movement, this is that this intellectual idea in which they're going to reject the accepted mores. And really, it's ushered in with this concept of the new left. The new left is going to be really targeted with for neo-Marxism, neo-Marxism, neo-Marxism. Please make sure you know neo-Marxism with the new left. And here we see the emergence of this book, One Dimensional Man. I misspelled dimensional, sorry about that. But Herbert Marcuse, One Dimensional Man. This is a pretty phenomenal read. It becomes almost like an intellectual Bible, if you will, of the new left. And the One Dimensional Man not only criticized American and Western capitalism, Marcuse also pointed to the idea that Soviet communism was a corrupt version of Marxism and that it was not anywhere near a true Marxist reality. So Marcuse called for the younger generation to really lead towards a revolutionary mindset. And this One Dimensional Man becomes really the book that made Herbert Marcuse a cult of personality for the intellectual movement. And the boomer intellectuals emerged as radical thinkers challenging the accepted political ideologies of the age. And then we see the counterculture movement within the permissive society. And permissive society is a broader term for both the sexual revolution and drug culture. When I think of the sexual revolution, you need to make sure you understand that this younger hippie generation is really rejecting what the acceptable restraints on sexuality. They rejected the concept of marriage. They're going to reject the idea that premarital sex was bad. And during this time period, we begin to see some really big advancements. Number one, the pill. The birth control pill was invented and was utilized throughout the 1960s, liberating women so that women no longer fear pregnancy with sexual activity. Really allowed women to become much more sexually available. Additionally, homosexuality was decriminalized in areas like Sweden and the Netherlands. And this decriminalization really began to see the beginnings of what we might call the Pride movement. The Pride movement actually begins in America during this time period with the Stonewall riots. And if you wanted more about that, please make sure you check that out. Before I go to the drug culture, I do want to point out the sexual revolution, the hippies. These are people who were challenging. And when I think of the sexual revolution, I also rethink about the idea that the book, The New Christianity from St. Simon, it gets its reprint during this time period. As St. Simon in that utopia from the 19th century, he introduced these new radical ideas. They're going to be fully embraced by the hippies. I know in California there were several communes that were established, and these were free love communes, and so they were trying to restructure all aspects of society. And this is followed with the drug culture. Here we see the psychedelic 60s. The drug culture is, again, significant in the sense that the hippies are going to reject the moral restraints that had been placed on it, and they believe that drugs would give them a better understanding of reality. Of course, marijuana becomes a really big drug that really that creates almost a marijuana culture. But we also see Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary was a Harvard professor of psychology, and he began to test LSD or acid to treat veterans from PTSD. He believed that LSD could help them recover better. And as he was testing this, he began to realize that LSD maybe didn't help them through PTSD, but it did give them a high or a trip. And all of a sudden, Timothy Leary begins to think that LSD might be a drug of freedom. And at the Harvard campus, he became his own little cult of personality. They called him the High Priest. of the psychedelic world. And Harvard would fire him. And once he's fired, he really fully embraced this cult of personality and led almost an LSD revolution. And there we begin to see this pervasive in all states and throughout Europe. And the hippies really believed that they were understanding truth, and that you can't criticize the use of LSD unless you've used it. Really important aspect. And so this boomer generation, these hippies, they believed that the older generation did not understand truth. They actually were obstacles to progress. And remember, guys, I keep on reminding, these older boomers were the hippies. And that's going to lead us right to the Vietnam War. I'm going to pause here